I thought, boy, oh boy, that fella's really into the soil in Normandy. We never had time to really evaluate things and get scared or anything. We were scared, but it didn't stop us from our job.
As the morning turned into afternoon, all Canadian units were pushing forward and moving well.
Our brigade moved off in one line with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders leading and the Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry Highlanders next, and we were in the rear.
We kept moving. South, north, south, I guess that's what's saying here.
They came out and they cheered us, they hugged us, they brought out whatever they had in the way of food. They wanted to give us something, whether it was cider or something else to drink and so on. Oh, they were so grateful that we'd finally come.
The first people that we saw from the beach, at least that I saw, one of a British commando unit had, I think it was led by Lord Lovett. They had landed in the British section, and they had bicycles, and they had their objective was to race ahead and join up with us.
It got to a point where they didn't want to fight. They were prepared to give up.
One determining factor on D-Day was the Allies' superiority over the Luftwaffe in the air.
Didn't see any German planes at the beginning. Later in the afternoon, one was foolish enough to come over. And they came down in pieces. They just blew it apart in the air.
They'd been, shall we say, disadvantaged.
It wasn't quite as strong as it was in the early part of the war.
Fighter command could keep Luftwaffe back, which they did, and they did a great job at it.
Of course, the Typhoons, which gave close support to the ground forces as they moved up through France, were tremendously important.
But for close support for infantry, tank busters, it's hard to beat the little Tiffy.
Generally, we controlled the air, which made a difference.
Continuous air support was flown over the beaches all day.
It was about 3 o'clock, and it was quite a different sortie from the viewpoint of what we were able to see on the ground, because by this time our troops were well inland, particularly the Canadian troops who really had moved very well. They were really moving in, and landing craft were continuing to come in at great volume all the way along, which indicated that a good foothold had been made.
The Canadian forces advanced rapidly on D-Day, quickly overcoming opposition.
You really had to be on your toes, and everybody looking for the Germans, and a lot of our anti-tank guns, the field guns would help us out.
I went again at 4 o'clock. For example, at one point I recall a hedgerow, and we could see German troops bend over going along the hedgerow, and Canadians were going down here, or Allies were going down this way. They were going to meet at the corner. The temptation was to go down and blast the Germans. But we had one job only, was to patrol the beach and keep enemy aircraft out. And just while we were watching, about half a dozen Typhoons come in. I think they were firing rockets, and they went in and they blasted the hell out of that hedge.
One of the things that we saw as we came back to England that afternoon were these great caissons, huge concrete blocks, huge, enormous things being towed out of port across to the beach.
Later on, they towed these barges over to tie them together and called it Mulberry Harbor.
And in order to supply an army and to keep supplying it with men and equipment and supplies, oil, gas, whatever you need, you had to have a port. When we landed and got back the second time, that was the end of the day for me in terms of flying operations.
It must have been about 5 o'clock in the afternoon when we finally got there. This was at the crossroads called Lemon Hill. My first job, when I arrived, I thought I was to dig in. They said, just go find the Germans. I went on the field side of that hedge, got about halfway along, and there was one of our fellows, a sniper, laying with his sniper's rifle aimed at the bush across the field. Anyway, when I went up, said something, nothing happened. When I went to step over him, I was surprised that he didn't move, so I stopped and shook him, and then he had a bullet right through his forehead, and eventually came to a fairly thick hedge that was at the side of a fairly gravelly road. And I was going to cross it, and then, but looking through that hedge, there was a farmhouse, about 300 feet away from the road, and there was a lot of Germans milling around it. So I said, well, that's where the Germans are. I headed back, reported in, and to the captain who had taken over the company, Captain Hansen. I was digging in a little bit later when we heard this whistling sound. That's the first time I'd ever heard it, but it turned out these be these big Navy shells. And on a patrol, a day later, 2 days later, we passed that place, and there was hardly anything left of that house.
While the forces on the ground continued advancing, the pilots returning to England reported on their progress.
Oh, another debriefing, and at that time we told what we had observed and all we could verify having seen without speculating on what was happening. One thing, of course, we'd go into the bar and have a drink, and have a bitter, I guess they called it, beer.
As the day wound down, there were more clashes with German units setting up the front.
The Germans put in an attack from the field that I'd gone across. They were firing at us from the hedge, the far end of the field. Everybody in our group, all of a sudden, they started opening up on them. And now they knew where we were, and that's all they wanted to know. From then on, we got shelled and mortared every damn day.
We ate compo packed, as we called it, and wasn't the best, but it was food, and we were hungry. It was pretty tense that night. We got as far as Benny-sur-Mer, but we were around a chateau, and so on. We had to dig in and expect a counterattack, maybe anytime.
The Canadian advance was highly successful, but it had to be halted.
Unfortunately, see, the British on our left got stalled, and the British on our right got stalled. And what happened is our brigade got in, kept going up there in a straight line, and just like a finger, and there was nothing in support on either side.
In one spot before Villers-les-Buissons there, they showed some of the Canadian tanks got that far. Then the 88s just clobbered them.
The North Nova's got the furthest inland because they got down past Buron into Othie.
Gradually, all of the Canadian units had to stop and dig in for the night.
The next experience, we advanced straight up to Capricaire Airport, and then we had to pull back because the bunkers were in the Capricaire.
That's the time we went as far as this airport, and about 20 miles in, and they called us back from there. Yeah? They were scared there'd be sort of ammunition.
Until we got up to a place called Villers-les-Buissons, and that was only about 3 miles from Buron. And then we just packed all the bicycles up.
We didn't meet the enemy head on. I don't know where the hell they were. But we dug in quickly to get down.
We finally reached the towns of Angerny and Annecy. Now, the Queen's Own went farther inland than any other regiment, and they took and held the objective.
There were times in the dark and you're exhausted. That tendency was to fall asleep. We had two men per slit. So you had to make sure at least one was awake. We were dead tired, and we were sick too. And of course, we hadn't slept coming across, and most of us hadn't eaten anything or could hold anything down. And most of us acquired headaches and so on.
We got through there, and then we settled down for that night. Then food came up to us at nighttime, and we ate what we could.
It was a very edgy time. Everybody was living on their nerves, I think.
We continued to sweep, and then our duty, once darkness came, was to go outside the landing area and patrol for, do anti-submarine patrol.
I had the runs badly. And in the town, there was a bakery. And they had these little hedges all around their properties. So I crept along the hedges all the way through into the bakery, because I was eating green apples, hungry. And of course, too many green apples, you know what happened. So that's what cured me, was the fresh bread.
We probably laid down and had a sleep for a little while, and then up again.
It was a pretty hair-raising situation all the time, especially at nighttime, because you didn't know what was happening. And then alongside of us, they used to fire tracer bullets. And that was for the airplanes, our planes up above. And these planes were drone overhead. And these bullets, they waved the guns up like this, and these tracers would go like this, and be a laneway for their planes to drop their bombs down at nighttime.